Today I'm speaking to my friend Alex-Adedipe. Ronke, I know Nigeria has a very interesting ecosystem and is leading Africa in many aspects when it comes to startups.
Mhm.
Now, with this crisis, I think it becomes more important than ever for startups to understand some of the challenges they will face when raising capital. Could we start by highlighting some of these challenges?
Thank you, Fabio. Traditionally, in the past, businesses in Nigeria, as well as across Africa, I believe, have relied on financial institutions like banks to raise capital. Um, but of course, this comes at a high cost of interest rates as well as unavailable collateral. Now, more often than not, businesses are caught in between trying to service their loans as well as trying to scale their businesses. And so they have moved from relying on traditional financial institutions to raising capital through venture capital firms. Now, while this may seem attractive at the first glance, it also comes with its own cost of loss of control and loss of certain rights in the long run.
Right. Well, I mean, if there was ever a time to look for alternative finance or alternative ways to raise capital, this is definitely now. I mean,
Mhm.
well, I know we've spoken before about the growing trend of crowdfunding in Nigeria. Could you give us an
Mhm.
update on how this is going nowadays?
Yes, correct, Fabio. So for the reasons that I had identified previously, many startups have had to find alternative and creative ways of raising funds. And one of such ways is raising funds through crowdfunding. Now, as opposed to the traditional methods where they have no means of control, where they have no means of determining who invests in their businesses and the returns that they get for such investments. Crowdfunding actually creates that laxity. And so what has happened is that for the past few years in Nigeria, startups have, created these platforms. And one of such very popular platforms is a platform known as Farm Crowdy. And what they do is they basically invite members of the general public to invest very small, amounts of capital, pockets of capital at and such capital is expended towards certain products, certain projects in exchange for returns at a particular time. And those times are determined by the startups themselves. One of the challenges with crowdfunding, though, is that the Securities and Exchange Commission had previously released a statement warning Nigerians, members of the general public, from participating in crowdfunding on the basis that, private companies are prohibited from soliciting funds from the general public, both under the Investment and Securities Act, as well as the Companies and Allied Matters Act. Now, of course, while this has been debatable, it's been a subject of debate. This has created some uncertainties as to whether investors should actually participate or whether there's a high risk of participating in this form of ventures. Um, in line with current day realities, however, the SEC has now come up with proposed rules. And what these rules intend to do is basically to regulate private firms, and these private firms who intend to raise capital from members of the general public in exchange for stock and other forms of security.
Right. So you're going to start have actual regulation. That's very interesting. I mean, I know different startups have different needs, and in
Mhm.
traditional venture capital, usually working rounds according to the company's development stage. That being said, I'm very curious to hear from you. Now that you're going to have regulations, are we going to see what sort of requirements in terms of eligibility? What do we need to know to be part of it?
Okay, well, to start with, the draft rules propose that there would be, in order to raise funds from the general public, you must have existed for a minimum period of 2 years, and you must also be registered in Nigeria. Now, one of the things that we hope to see in the final rules is that this 2-year eligibility requirement is either reduced or removed entirely. And this is due to the fact that, I mean, realistically, startups who want to raise capital for the purpose of scaling would not be able to meet this 2-year requirement.
It wouldn't be startups, right?
Yes, exactly. They wouldn't be startups.
Right. And how about, do you see any limits in terms of fundraising?
Okay, well, yes. Another limitation or another requirement is that, so depending on whether you're a micro, small, or medium-sized enterprise, there are certain limitations on how much you can raise, and this ranges from about $125,000 to about $250,000 at today's exchange rate, and this is for over a period of 12 months. Now, realistically, we don't see how this is going to help startups because, so given tech startups, for example, always have to raise a lot of capital. They have a lot of capital requirements. And for them to be able to scale and for this regulation to actually be useful to them, it is proposed that, this threshold is either substantially higher or removed in its entirety. So we're hoping that in the final event, when these rules, are released, this threshold would either be substantially higher or entirely removed.
I see. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But before I let you go, just one last question. You mentioned platforms before, and I was wondering if these regulations will actually touch those platforms. I mean, what sort of platforms companies could use to raise capitals under this new framework?
Okay, yeah. So as a fundraiser, the rules would define you as an issuer if you're a fundraiser. And what the rules would require is that for you to be able to participate in fundraising, you have to do so through a registered crowdfunding platform. Crowdfunding platforms must be registered with SEC, and the platforms have the obligation to actually vet fundraisers to determine whether or not they meet the eligibility criteria and the rules that have been laid down by SEC.
Right. Okay, well, thank you very much, Ronk. These are some very interesting developments, particularly for young Nigerian entrepreneurs who have something to look forward once we come out of this crisis. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you again.
Thank you, Fabio. Stay safe.